The babysitting job that turned into a nightmare. Babysitting had always been easy money, a few hours, a couple of kids, and then home. But one night, in a creaky old house, I found myself trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. In the fall of 2019, I took a last-minute babysitting job for the Lathrop family. They lived in a sprawling, decaying Victorian house on the edge of town, its ivy-covered walls giving it a haunted look even in daylight. I'd be watching two kids, Elliot, 9, and Sophie, 5, while their mother attended a charity event. She promised to be back by midnight. The kids seemed sweet enough when I arrived, though they were unusually quiet. Mrs. Lathrop left in a hurry, and I waved her off, feeling a little uneasy about the house's oppressive atmosphere. The evening began without incident. I made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, and we played a board game before I tucked Elliot and Sophie into bed around 8:30. Their room was charming in a vintage way. Lace curtains, a rocking chair by the window, but something about it felt off. The air seemed heavier upstairs. After they fell asleep, I settled onto the couch downstairs with my phone. The house was full of the usual creaks and groans of old wood settling, but one sound stood out, a faint knock. I dismissed it at first, assuming it was just the wind against the shutters. Then my phone rang. The number was unlisted. My heart skipped as I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" I asked, but there was only static. Just as I was about to hang up, a voice whispered, faint and raspy, "You think they're safe, don't you?" A chill ran through me. I glanced at the baby monitor on the coffee table. The grainy screen showed Elliot and Sophie sound asleep in their beds. It had to be a prank call. I hung up, trying to shake off the unease. The phone rang again minutes later. This time the whisper was sharper, dripping with malice. "They're not where you think they are," it hissed. My hands trembled as I crept upstairs to peek into their room. They were still asleep, their small forms undisturbed under the blankets. I exhaled, feeling silly for letting a prank call rattle me. When I returned to the living room, the phone rang a third time. I answered, my voice shaking. "Who is this? What do you want?" The reply was chilling. "You should have left when you had the chance." Fear surged as I bolted upstairs. Elliot's bed was empty. Panic tightened my chest as I scanned the room. He was standing in the corner, his back to me, completely still. "Elliot?" I whispered. He didn't respond. When I stepped closer, his head snapped around. His wide, unblinking eyes met mine, and he whispered, "He says you can't stop him." The baby monitor crackled to life, and the same voice hissed, "You're too late now. They're mine." I tucked Elliot back into bed, my hands trembling. Then I heard it, the faint creak of footsteps behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Desperate to calm my nerves, I grabbed the baby monitor. Its screen flickered, showing static before focusing on a shadowy figure standing at the foot of Sophie's bed. The figure was tall and indistinct, but its presence was unmistakable. My breath caught, and I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I called Mrs. Lathrop, desperate for reassurance. The phone rang endlessly until someone finally answered. But it wasn't her voice. It was the same distorted whisper. "Why do you stay? You're too late now. They're mine." I bolted back upstairs, heart pounding. Elliot and Sophie were awake, sitting upright in bed. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. Sophie's reply sent shivers through me. "The man with no face is watching us." I looked around the room, finding nothing but shadows. "There's no one here," I assured them, though I didn't believe it myself. As I turned off the light, something shifted in the doorway. A tall, dark form that vanished as soon as I focused on it. The phone rang again. This time the whisper was a command. "Leave the house or you'll never leave at all." I didn't wait to find out what that meant. I grabbed Elliot and Sophie, practically dragging them downstairs. The front door swung open just as we reached it, and there stood Mrs. Lathrop, her face pale with confusion. "What's going on?" she demanded. Before I could answer, she looked past me and gasped. "The children!" I turned to find the space behind me empty. Elliot and Sophie were gone. Have you ever experienced something you can't explain? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales like this one. See you in the next story.
What started as a quiet night shift turned into a desperate fight for safety. This wasn't just a caregiving job. It became a night I'll never forget. I've always enjoyed being a caregiver. It felt meaningful, and I thought I could handle anything. That was until I took a one-time night shift with the Peterson family. I only worked there for a single night, and after what happened, I knew I'd never return. This isn't just a story about a challenging job. It's about fear, survival, and the realization that not everything can be explained. It started with a call from Joanna Peterson, a nurse who worked the night shift at a nearby hospital. She needed someone to stay with her father, Walter, a 68-year-old man suffering from advanced dementia. Joanna warned me he sometimes wandered the house at night, acting confused. "Just guide him back to bed," she said. "He's harmless." The job seemed straightforward. I had experience with dementia patients, and the pay was good. When I arrived, Joanna gave me a tour of their small, outdated house. Walter nodded politely when we were introduced, though his eyes lingered on me with a strange intensity. Joanna left for her shift around 9 p.m., leaving me alone with Walter and the creaky, dimly lit house. At first, everything was quiet. Walter went to his room early, and I settled into the living room with a book. I told myself it would be an easy night. But that was before the noises began. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard slow, deliberate footsteps upstairs. I called out, "Walter, do you need anything?" There was no response. The sound stopped, and his bedroom door clicked shut. I figured he'd gone to the bathroom and returned to bed. An hour later, as I was grabbing water from the kitchen, I froze. Walter stood in the doorway, his face partially obscured by shadows. He was barefoot, and the faint crunch of glass beneath his feet drew my eyes downward. Shards of a broken glass were scattered around him. "Walter, are you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. His reaction was immediate and alarming. "Who are you? Why are you here?" he shouted, his voice sharp and trembling. I stepped back, explaining gently who I was and why I was there. He stared at me, his hands shaking. Finally, he let me guide him back to his room. I gave him his prescribed melatonin and medication, hoping he'd sleep for the rest of the night. Exhausted, I followed Joanna's suggestion to rest in the spare bedroom. I was reluctant, but told myself it would be fine. I fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a rhythmic banging, loud and steady. My heart raced as I realized it was coming from the kitchen. I crept downstairs, my footsteps muffled by the old carpet. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by a faint light from the hallway. Walter stood there, slamming a cupboard door open and shut, his movements slow but deliberate. His silhouette was stark against the dim light, and the sound of the banging seemed unnaturally loud. "Walter?" I called softly. He stopped, turned toward me, and began walking in my direction. His blank expression sent chills down my spine. Without a word, he turned and shuffled back to his room. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity before finally going back upstairs. I woke again to a soft noise in the room. My breath caught as I realized it was coming from the closet. The door was slightly ajar, and a shadow loomed within. "Walter?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The door creaked open, and Walter stepped out slowly. He was holding a large kitchen knife, his hand trembling slightly. His face was blank, his eyes unfocused. "Who are you?" he murmured. "I don't know you." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. He took a step closer, raising the knife. My body acted on instinct. I leapt off the bed, darting around him as he swung the knife in a slow, clumsy arc. The blade missed me by inches. I bolted down the stairs, adrenaline surging through me. I grabbed my shoes and stumbled out into the cold night air, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I called Joanna. "What happened?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. I tried to explain, but panic made my words come out jumbled. "He's got a knife! He doesn't know who I am," I managed to choke out. "Stay there! Don't leave him alone!" she snapped. But there was no way I was going back inside. I waited outside, shivering, until Joanna arrived. When Joanna went inside, she found Walter asleep in bed, the knife lying on the floor next to him. Her initial anger turned to unease when she saw the blade. She apologized profusely, But her words didn't erase the fear that lingered in my chest. I knew I could never return to that house. Some jobs push you to your limits, but this one had gone far beyond mine. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're into chilling, unforgettable stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.